Welcome back to the podcast series on partners, where we go way beyond playbooks and we dive into the real world strategies that make partnerships work in B2B tech. This is the Partner Podcast. My name is Jeff Ballard. And if you've been following us from the start, you'll remember our first track, Scaling Smart. In that series, we tackled what it takes to scale a partner practice after recruitment and enablement, from aligning revenue goals to co-selling motions, incentivizing, and driving real partner-led growth. Now we're going to zoom in on that second phase, and arguably the most overlooked phase of partner engagement, and that is empowerment. Now notice I didn't say enablement, I said empowerment. This partner track, this track's about partner empowerment. It's all about what happens after the recruitment, but before the scale. How do you turn a recruited partner into a self-sufficient, revenue-ready ally? How do you create GTM strategies, give partners the tools they actually will be using, and make education translate into dollars? In other words, how can you help to empower them to drive their own success? As I said, Jeff Ballard, I'm your host for the Foresight Unfiltered Partner Podcast series. We help B2B technology companies. My background is I've helped B2B technology companies, big and small, move beyond basic enablement to build strategic revenue generating partnerships. I'm the founder of the Accelerator Network and bring way more years than I'd like to admit of go-to-market experience and partner experience, working with global giants like IBM, Seagate, Symantec, as well as many other startup and mid-level technology companies. I help build programs that deliver real impact for tech vendors. Today, we're going to be talking about, as I said, empowerment. Partner Empowered, Turning Potential into Performance is the official title of this series. And in this series, we're going to go beyond enablement to explore how to design partner onboarding that drives confidence and clarity, aligning go-to-market and product strategies with the partner's business goals, equipping partners to sell, differentiate, and co-innovate, build engagement programs that lead to revenue, not just certifications, and use tech and data to drive partner self-sufficiency and growth. So this episode is Shared GTM, Shared Wins, aligning your strategy to their business. Empowerment isn't a one-way street. So this episode is going to explore how to co-create go-to-market strategies with your partners, align around mutual ICPs, and ensure joint initiatives are rooted in business value, not just product training. And today we're talking to Gavin Booth, strategic consulting partner, EMEA, and portfolio lead. I'll let him give his title, but that's what I saw on his LinkedIn. And I'm going to let him do all his introduction before we really dive in. So welcome to the podcast, Gavin.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I love partnerships. You know, we see them in everyday life. You think about McDonald's and their franchises. You think about Mercedes and you think about CarPlay. Those companies get together because the value they offer to customers together is more than they can do alone. And of course, that's what partnerships are all about. So as you said, my name's Gavin Booth. I've worked for 10 years or so in telcos, where the partnerships were with hardware providers out into their customer base. 10 years or so in consulting companies, where the partnerships are all about the people and process implementation to get business value out of technology. And now work in a technology company, working with those same consulting partners to offer value into their client. And I love the way that you put it earlier, turning education into revenue. And that will be a great strap line for this podcast. So thank you for inviting me.
Glad to have you on board, and always glad to have such an esteemed colleague to chat with. So let's get into some of the questions that I've got. So one of the first things that we want to understand as we're going into this is, how do you uncover a partner's go-to-market priorities and where you fit into them?
Yeah, what a super question. I'm going to see if I can zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to the question. So we've done some research, and I wrote a book on this topic, actually. So there's a shameless plug in there. If people are interested in what we're talking about here, the Strategic Alliances Field Book is where a lot of my thinking on this topic goes. So I'd start by saying it's got to be very customer relevant. And when I look at what end customers are choosing partnerships for, it's only really 6 things. It comes down to increasing revenue, reducing costs, delighting their customers, providing innovation, enhancing their brand, and managing risk. It's those 6 things. So one way of starting to answer your question is by saying we're looking at what the effect of the partnership can have in terms of that end customer's 6 priorities. And then the second thing we think about is, I call it the 5 R's. You mentioned revenue earlier. So, of course, these partnerships are designed ultimately for revenue. Maybe that's not what you get in the first quarter or the second quarter, et cetera, et cetera. But eventually, if the partnership isn't producing revenue, can't pay people's salaries, and you tend to see those things kind of drifting away. So the 5 R's are: revenue is what you're trying to get to. Relationships are what you're looking for collectively. Who knows which individuals in which accounts. Relevance in terms of the partnership's capabilities. Who's got the right technology, who can implement the technology, who's got the people and process change capability. Resources in terms of how many people have they got in front of the customer and can do the particular work. And then repeatability, super, super important, because I've been part of many alliances. You win one. If you can't create repeatable wins, of course, you can't scale the partnership. So that's the kind of second way I'd start to think about how to answer your question. We're looking for those 5 R's, and ultimately the most important R at the end of the partnership is, can you create revenue? And we kind of do that by going through a fairly structured set of steps. Now, I think this is true whether it's a brand new partnership or whether it's an existing partnership where you're spinning up a new go-to-market motion. So we think in terms of validating the marketplace, which really means in many cases winning an anchor client. Can you prove your hypothesis that a customer gets value out of a particular set of offerings and capabilities by winning something? If you can, fantastic. If a customer's not buying it or not showing you some interest signals, maybe you haven't quite got your offering right. The second step is kind of designing that partnership, by which I mean making sure you've got the right sets of solutions, pricing, the right construct to be able to go to market together. The third one is enablement, sales, and technical enablement, because, of course, if the account teams don't understand what you'd like to present to their customers, it's never going to get in front of the customers. The fourth step, I've called it originate. And this is really about being very intentional about the offering that you're taking to which part of the market, which country, which kind of buying personas, etc. And then, of course, once you've originated, you win something, you contract and deliver it, which is step 5, and then you're going to go around that cycle again and improve it. So that's a super long way of coming to the answer to your question, which is we look really carefully at the parts of the business that we're in, the parts of business that the partner's in, and look very intentionally at where we're going to create that revenue by bringing all those capabilities to bear.
I like the way you started off with customer. When I'm working with vendors around their partner program, that's where I always start. Who is the customer? Why are they engaging the partners? Then how can we help the partners be successful? So I think that's a really good strategy. And, all too often that I've seen where companies sign a new partner, and if they do some business planning, it's really around the sales team sitting down and doing account planning, for lack of a better term. They just kind of put a slant to it that they call it business planning. I like to come in and do go-to-market strategy where we understand that customer, we take a look at the joint product offering, then how can we market together and how can we sell together? So it sounds like a really great thing that you've outlined certainly maps to directions and what I've seen to be very successful. So the next question, what do you see as the difference between a shared strategy versus a one size fits all kits for partner kits?
So I think in the world that I've lived in, it kind of has to be a shared strategy. So what I mean by that is the companies that I've worked in, hundreds of thousands of people in terms of the consulting partners, multiple tens of billions of dollars of revenue for the technology partners. So that they tend to be fairly big companies. And so kind of almost by definition, one size fits all just doesn't work. What you agree with, a consulting company that employs 500,000 people in America will be very different to the execution that you actually achieve in the UK in financial services, for example, or in Germany in manufacturing. And I think that's why it's so important to do that kind of forensic analysis I talked about in terms of the answer to your first question. Being very intentional, looking at those discrete areas of where there is already a kind of overlap in terms of customers, capabilities, demand from the marketplace, and where you're creating new demand, or maybe where there's an area that you just should, kind of take that out of your business plan because, collectively, maybe you've got some competing products in there, for example. That's fairly common. Maybe that's an area where collectively you just don't have an answer to the set of client questions. So my answer, and this will be specific to the kind of experience that I've had, is that one size fits all. It really kind of isn't an option. The super high level, very superficial level. Yes, of course, you've got to be able to describe a top level strategy, but in terms of doing the execution, you've got to be very forensic. And by that I mean I wrote a blog actually a while ago. Again, another shameless plug. If your listeners are interested in this kind of content, if you look me up on LinkedIn, you're going to find that there's a blog in there called Adventures in Alliances Land. The one that I'm going to talk about, I called it the GTM matrix, the go-to-market matrix. So if you take a large company, or you take one of the big four, for example, every country's got a different strategy. Every partner is kind of more or less running their own P&L. You've kind of got one very large organization, with 1,000 individual businesses within it. And so we look at not quite at every single one of the 1,000, but we kind of look very closely at the elements of the go-to-market matrix are the country, the industry, the domain that you're looking in. So that might go down as far as saying, for example, we want to look at the UK as a geography. We want to look at the insurance industry as an industry. We want to look at claims processing as a domain, and that's where we're going to create a specific offering. You might do that with a company collectively, with exactly the same company, with very similar people, similar kind of capabilities. You might end up saying, well, that just doesn't translate into France, for example, because their insurance marketplace is different. For France, we're going to, France is the geography. The industry is, let's say, luxury goods, for example. We're going to go after CPG companies. We've got supply chain capability in that country, in that industry, which is particularly relevant because, maybe its interest rates are changing. The foreign exchange rates have changed the way that supply chains operate. Tariffs have also had an effect. Therefore, there's a set of customer needs in France, in the luxury goods industry, in the supply chain domain that are very unique. And therefore, we're going to come with a solution that is specific to that. And of course, when you do that, it means that you can be hyper-targeted in terms of the client base that you're looking for. Because when you do that, it's France, it's luxury, it's supply chain. It becomes much more straightforward to be able to distinguish, this account is relevant, this individual in that account is relevant. And that, of course, is where you start your go-to-market planning. from a high-level marketing awareness piece, perhaps into a client roundtable, for example, for that industry, perhaps down to very specific proactive offers for individual clients where one of the partners already has some kind of level of incumbency. So that's quite a long answer, Jeff, but hopefully that gives you some examples of, in my experience anyway, how we kind of carve down from a top-level strategy, which might be relatively high level, into a very, very specific and intentional go-to-market, with some dimensions around it.
Yeah, and I've seen that work really well, and I'd love to get your input when you're a medium-sized company, let's say, and you're partnering with a large organization. And I can give you an example. I was with an organization that partnered with AWS. So if there's a company out there that's mid-size, how do they best align with that larger company? Is it, the success I've seen is taking that narrowing it down and getting what that solution is, what that offering is, and working with that specific team. That's where I've seen some good success. Is that something that you would, have you seen something different, or what are your thoughts when a medium-sized company is trying to align with that larger company?
I haven't done it myself. The companies I work for tends to be in the kind of bulge bracket, if you like, but I don't imagine it's very, very different. I'll give you a couple of examples of experiences I've had that kind of didn't work and how we oriented them. I was in a professional services firm, one of the big four, for a while. We put together a fairly generic migration offering for clients into one of the big cloud service providers. And it took a while for us to learn that company's relevance to its clients was in particular functional areas, particularly in the risk space. When we pivoted with that cloud provider into risk management as a domain in the financial services industry, our ability to describe to the technology company why we were relevant was instantly elevated. We went from kind of saying, we're big, we've got a generic offering, to being able to say we're relevant in a very specific area to your clients. Mm-hmm. Now, I do see sometimes people instinct is, let's go after everything all at once. And I kind of understand that, because the TAM that you're trying to get to, if you say let's do everything, the target addressable market you're trying to get to, if you say let's do everything, is obviously huge. But the downside of it is it's really hard to be able to execute simultaneously on everything. So counterintuitively, starting narrow by saying, geography, industry, domain, winning a few of those anchor clients, being able to create those win stories, getting the excitement building, that actually, in my experience, has meant you move an awful lot faster, because then you're building into adjacencies rather than trying to do everything at the same time.
Completely makes sense. So I have a good idea what the next answer is going to be on this next question. What frameworks do you see that help you co-build demand gen with the partners?
I think I'd probably go back to what I call the blueprint that I went through earlier. So validate the market, design, enable, originate, kind of selling and contract. So if you think of those as the big steps, what we're talking about in terms of demand generation fits inside of that originate bucket. And so I guess I'd end up saying quite a similar thing. Once you're clear about your geography, your industry, and your domain, then you've got to think about what are your kind of specific market activation motions. So I'm trying to think of some really good examples. One is for the financial services sector, particularly from a regulation standpoint. In the UK, you can convene groups of people whose business functions are subject to the same regulations. They'll have a specific interest in an offering if it's designed to solve for whatever that new regulation means, as well as being interested in what it means for their sector and the offering that you've got as a customer. They also want to do peer networking, right? So in one case, you might end up saying we've got an offering, and so we're going to do customer roundtables, and they're going to show up because they love talking about solving a regulation problem. They also love talking to each other, because they're going to compare notes on it. You'll have other sectors if they're, if you've got a larger number of customers to go after. If you want to hit, a sector with 100 companies in it, for example, maybe you're going to do a webinar instead, or a conference. So the difference there would be, instead of doing kind of 10 companies in a small round table, kind of intimate setting where people feel comfortable sharing and comparing in confidence, you're doing something which is a much larger forum, either in person, or a webinar would be an example of a remote one. So, in all of those kind of market activation modes, you've got a handful of different options. But of course, where you're trying to get to for every single one of them is to get in front of a potential buyer, to be able to explain your value proposition, put a proactive proposal in front of them. Because, of course, that's a great leading indicator when you can achieve that. That's a great leading indicator for revenue, which, of course, we said earlier, is one of the reasons that we put these alliances together in the first place.
Completely makes sense. Having that go-to-market strategy around all of those components, that is definitely the winning combination. I was mentioning earlier, starting with customers, you talked about customers. What do you see as a good ICP alignment process that actually gets used?
This is one of my favorite topics, Jeff. I've got a phrase, I call it a key account program. And the idea is, if you are super intentional about how you select for clients, how you approach a client and team together, and then how you provide them with some value, you can come up with a much better approach in terms of success rates than if you kind of spray at the entire marketplace at one time. So using this idea of a key account program, we have done, in all the companies actually that I've been part of, we come up with a long list of, here's every customer name on the FTSE 100 or, the S&P 500 or whatever it is. There's a kind of universe of large enterprises that typically the partnerships that I've been in start with. Narrow it down to where have we got existing customers between the two businesses. Depending on what the offering set is, you do another filter on that. Let's take my example of insurers in the UK, so you cut down further. And so you build into your selection process, kind of before you even start the go-to-market, your ICP, your ideal customer profile. And then you've got to go kind of further than that. Once you've done the selection based on a really intentional ICP, you've got to be able to turn that into a next action. The most effective way that I've seen this done is by being able to kind of meaningfully team on an account. Now, in the kind of alliances that I'm in, it can be quite difficult from a sense that they tend to be large companies. They tend to have multiple options in terms of their technology providers. They also tend to have multiple options in terms of their consulting providers. So they're quite congested. What we found here, and what I found is equally true in other places, when you've got that ICP and you apply it and you can describe to the account teams what the value to the customer is, back to those 6 enduring customer priorities, and you can define what we sometimes refer to as fields of play, and be proactive there, it means that you're kind of taking away a lot of the noise of all the other options that the customer has. You show up together with a thoughtfully researched proposition which solves for a particular set of customers' problems, ideally with a case study as well of someone else who's done it before. And that's where you get through from account selection through to teaming, using an ICP into winning. And the win rates when doing that tend to be more than double the win rates where, you're a bit more kind of relaxed about how you choose the customers.
Okay. Well, I've got one last question here for you. And, I would be remiss this day and age if I didn't, utter the words AI. No podcast, no blog, no anything can happen without talking about AI. So let's talk about, do you see the dynamics of partnering change for Gen AI and agentic AI?
I think no would be the short answer. And here's a bit of context in terms of the numbers. I mean, you're right. Maybe we should have started with this question. So we think roughly a third of the entire IT spend, which this year was around 5.3 trillion, roughly a third of that 5.3 trillion over the next couple of years is going to be very heavily influenced by AI. Either it is AI inside a consulting partner solution, or it's AI in terms of a piece of SaaS software, or it's AI in terms of the kind of infrastructure management or the software development lifecycle, whichever ones of those bits of IT spend it is. Customers are increasingly looking for that AI component, in terms of kind of speed, cost reduction, improving the innovation. That's one way of saying that the kind of numbers are enormous, and that's why you see the levels of share prices for the companies that do this kind of work, the levels of CapEx that people are spending on building new data centers, etc. So that's one way of saying, it's a super valid marketplace. It's exciting. It's a big and busy place to be. But fundamentally, it's no difference in terms of producing value for the customer than those other motions that I've talked about. When you kind of think about waves of cloud transformation or digital transformation that we used to call it over the last kind of decade or so, fundamentally being able to describe what is the value proposition, how does it fit those, again, we're back to the kind of 6 client enduring priorities: cost, revenue, customer satisfaction, etc. Kind of describe it in those terms and be able to demonstrate value for it. The go-to-market for it looks very, very similar. Define the geography, look at the industry, what are those domains where AI can produce value for the client, and kind of work through the process in that direction.
Awesome. So I kind of lied on the last one because I do have one more question.
Go on.
Gavin, this is like the penultimate question. There is a wrong answer, but I do want to know. Here's the question: Beatles or Stones?
My word. You didn't even prepare me for this one, Jeff.
No, just kind of threw that curveball there, especially with you being, you're out of the UK. It's like, well, that's kind of an extra special one for you because they're both, homegrown bands for you.
I'm going to go for Stones because they're still.
Well, it's been nice talking to you.
I think they were last year. And if I'm going as fast as that and having that much fun when I'm the same age as them, I'd be delighted, as well as loving the music, of course.
Yeah, I just read where Mick Jagger actually hit the charts just recent, like last week, with a new solo song. So, all right, I'll let you give that answer for longevity, but normally that's like it. Beatles is always the right answer, just so you know. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Definitely appreciate all of your insights. Very much a lot there. There's definitely a lot there. And I'd love if you could give the name of your book so people can go out and look for the book, because I think if they want to continue this, that's a really good place to start.
Well, that's very generous. You're giving me a second opportunity to plug it. So it's called The Strategic Alliances Field Book. It's co-written with Mike Nevin and James Whitehurst.
Awesome. So if you want to follow on with this conversation, get more, definitely get that book. You can also reach out to both Gavin and I on LinkedIn, and certainly through our emails and other contact information provided in the chat below. So thank you very much, Gavin. Definitely appreciate you coming on and talking about empowerment. I know we've got you for another episode here coming up, so I look forward to that conversation as well. So until then, thanks for listening. For Buyer Foresight, myself, I'm happy to know that you're here. And by the way, if you have anything you would like us to talk about, make sure to drop us a line and let us know. We are always looking for topics, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today, Gavin. Totally appreciate it. And until next time, have fun.
Thanks, Jeff.